Scott Dean Ponder was born on February 7, 1973, and was raised by his loving family, consisting of his mother Beverly Guy and his stepfather Terry Guy. From an early age, Scott showed interest in cars and motorbikes that was greatly supported by his parents, who wanted him to improve his riding skills. They even got him a racer's license when he turned legal. Young Scott started taking racing as a lifestyle, even participating at the Daytona Motor Speedway in Florida. His sharp skills and excellent racing earned him numerous admirers and turned him into a local hero in the town of Chesney. Scott was also very social and preferred to hang out with large groups. People also loved Scott's company. Scott started the idea of the superbike motorsports first in his grandmother's backyard in the late 1990s, where he would repair bikes. Slowly, he started to upgrade his shop to a one-garage building in 2001. He even decided to take in his best friend, Brian Lucas, as his co-partner in the business. And the two young men started to expand their business further. They signed up with Suzuki for a dealership, and their business grew unexpectedly in a short period of time. Brian, who used to work part-time at the starting of the business, decided to leave his job to become a full-time manager of the store. With their hard work and knowledge, the pair started attracting a lot of customers, and the business started to bloom. Even though they were salesmen, they took utmost care when it came to their customers' knowledge about bikes or racing in general. Scott's mother, who first visited the store occasionally, now started to pay regular visits. Soon, she took up the job of taking care of the accounting, payroll, cash drops, and other such work. With the trio, the business boomed, selling 100,000 motorbikes every month. Scott decided to attend an industry convention in Chicago. It was during this trip that Scott met his wife, Melissa Brackman, a former homecoming queen from Stafford High School. They immediately clicked and started to enjoy each other's company, thus meeting up with each other often. As their relationship grew stronger, they decided to get married. Their love life, both before and after their marriage, was that of a fairy tale where the love grew stronger every passing day. To complete their family, Scott and Melissa decided to have a baby, but unfortunately for them, none of their attempts were bearing any fruit. Frustrated, the couple sought medical attention and advice, and finally, after months of struggles, Melissa was pregnant with a little baby boy in October of 2003. With millions of sales in the very first year of business, Scott knew he had to expand his store even more. In order to do this, he required more hands on deck and decided to hire a new mechanic, Chris Sherbert. Chris was quite well known around town for his skilled use of the wrench that attracted Scott towards him. The four of them, Scott, Beverly, Brian, and Chris, became a sort of a dream team, and their business started to gain attention even outside the small town of Chesney. Everything was going perfectly for the young and talented Scott Ponder until the arrival of his doomsday. Living such a perfect life, Scott never imagined his happiness to be cut short. But this was what happened on November 6, 2003. It was a normal day with not a cloud in the sky and the sun was beaming, but it was not the case at the Superbike Motorsports. Scott and the others started their day at the shop like any other. There were a few customers browsing items in the store. One of them was Kelly Sisk, who had his 4-year-old son with him. He was going to buy a go-kart for his family, and after paying for it, he hung around in the shop for a little while longer. Brian actually had the day off because he was planning to go on a holiday with his family, but he was called in by Scott because there was a customer who said that the bike was not tended to as they promised. Brian came to the shop and immediately started to work on the customer's bike. Scott was tending to another customer when Beverly came by after taking Scott's cancer-stricken grandmother to chemo. She used to take deposits for her son to the bank, and that day she was intending to do the same. When she dropped by, she started to help Scott a little at the counter, since she was planning to go to the bank much later. At around 2:30 p.m., Scott's friend Noah Lee called the shop. Beverly answered the phone, and he asked if he could stop by the shop and it would only take him 7 minutes to reach the shop, to which Beverly agreed. The conversation was short, and after putting the phone back down, Beverly decided to use the bathroom. In the span of 7 minutes, all 4 people in the shop, Scott, Brian, Beverly, and Chris, were savagely shot to death on the Superbike Motorsports premises. At 3 p.m., when Scott's friend, Noel, came by, he saw Scott and Brian lying at the front of the shop as still as statues. At first, he felt they were playing a trick on him. He even likely kicked both of them, telling them to stop messing with him until he saw the pool of blood underneath their bodies and immediately dialed 911. Police and paramedics immediately rushed to the scene. After all, it was the first ever quadruple murder in such a small town like Chesney. The news of the homicide spread like wildfire, and not only the victims' families, but a dozen other people gathered at the crime scene in order to catch a glimpse. The police wasted no time and immediately started the investigation. They found the mechanic, Chris' body at the back of the shop. It was bent over as if he was working on a bike right before he was robbed of his life. Next, they found Beverly's body inside the shop, right in front of the bathroom. The police believe she was ambushed right when she came out of the bathroom. The police found Brian and Scott's bodies, both lying at the front of the store. Brian's body was closer to the door, near the sidewalk, while Scott's body was closer to one of the parked cars in the parking lot. This, the police inferred, was maybe because both Scott and Brian were trying to run for their lives. They went inside, probably on hearing the gunshots, and came face to face with the shooter. And on seeing the dead bodies of Chris and Beverly, they immediately ran out the door, but their attempt to escape failed miserably. The police and forensic teams searched the crime scene thoroughly and gathered blood samples and other evidence from the crime scene. This was an execution-style homicide, where the shooter entered the shop with the motive to murder the people present there and shot them in the chest and head point blank. Scott's wife, Melissa, got a call about the shooting and immediately rushed to the scene. Detectives conducted a thorough investigation, and it didn't take them long to arrive at their first clue. From the statements made by a few passersby in the area at the time of the murder, they declared to have spotted a couple loitering near the shop. Sketches of the suspects were drawn during the questioning of these eyewitnesses, and the detectives immediately circulated the pictures all over South Carolina. The detectives speculated that the man was the one who shot the victims, Chris and Beverly, at the back, while the woman was distracting the two men, Scott and Brian, up front. When the man came to the front where the two men were, he shot them. This was just mere speculation by the detectives, and none of the facts in this theory were proven. Months passed and police couldn't find any clue regarding the case. Extensive media coverage of the case started putting pressure on the detectives as they started to revisit the crime from a different perspective, and sure enough, a breakthrough appeared. Detectives started to do a thorough study of the victims' past and current lifestyles, and though Scott, Beverly, and Brian's backgrounds came out to be clean, it was not the same for the mechanic, Chris Sherbert. When detectives checked Chris' previous job, the news of a drug connection came into the picture. The detectives found out that Chris might have been involved with the wrong company and was also responsible for smuggling drugs. Moreover, Chris was scheduled to go to court the following Monday before the murder took place. It was 2003 when drug smuggling and abuse was increasing every single day, and the Glyphs were hoping to arrest the key criminal players to eradicate the root cause of drug abuse, especially among young teens. The detectives and the public now started to wonder if this quadruple homicide took place with the motive to murder only Chris and the other three victims were just collateral damage. They even started to speculate that maybe the people involved in this drug business felt that Chris would give evidence against them in court on Monday and decided to end his life. The detective said that this could be a possibility since Chris was the one who was shot first. However, regarding this path of speculation, no evidence was found by the police. Therefore, the investigation stalled again. Finally, after a whole year, the detectives approached the case from a completely different angle once again. The detectives found that Brian, Scott's friend and co-worker, was looking for a house weeks before the murder, but strangely enough, his wife Robin had no idea regarding this decision taken by him. Later, Brian's mother, Lorraine Lucas, spoke of the unhappy and strained marriage between the pair and how Brian was planning to move out to live alone. Though this didn't seem to have a connection to the shooting, a discovery made by the detectives a few days later brought out a shocking revelation to the case. This quadruple homicide took the lives of 4 people and broke the hearts of many others. The victims' families were coping with the hard times, but it was especially hard for Melissa. Her life was perfect before it all came crashing down when her beloved husband was shot. Despite all this, Melissa knew she couldn't give up now that she had a new reason to continue living, and that was her son. When Melissa's son, Scott Ponder Jr., was born in June 2004, Melissa was still being called upon by the police at Interpol for interrogation. In one such incident, the police collected the DNA sample of Scott Jr. from a discarded diaper when Melissa had changed him at the station itself. The results of the DNA test left everyone dumbfounded. According to the reports, Scott Jr. was not the child of Scott, but Brian, since his DNA matched with Brian's found at the crime scene. This created tension between Melissa and her father-in-law, William Ponder, who kept asking her if this was true. The detectives started to approach this case from the point of a possible love triangle between Scott, Melissa, and Brian. Questions about her being unfaithful to her husband spread all throughout the neighborhood. Moreover, Brian's mother stated that it was possible for Brian to have an affair considering how unhappy Brian was in his marriage, and the thought of divorce might have crossed his head at times. Melissa was called multiple times to the police station for interrogation about her affair, but she was resolute. She said that both she and Scott had struggled a lot to conceive this baby, and Scott Jr. was undoubtedly Scott Ponder's child. She later told about how she was harassed every day by the same questions when she knew it was hers and Scott's baby. For the next year and a half, detectives kept track of every move made by Melissa in order to find a breakthrough. Finally, after 18 months, however, the detectives claimed that there must have been a mistake regarding the blood sample collected at the crime scene. The detectives stated that they conducted a DNA test for Beverly and Scott from the blood sample collected from the crime scene, and the results did not match. In the reports, Brian's DNA matched Beverly's when, clearly, Scott was the son of Beverly. At this point, the detectives knew that they had made a grave mistake. They put the wrong name on the blood sample of Scott and Brian collected from the crime scene, since both the bodies of Scott and Brian were lying next to each other. This cleared up all the accusations laid against Melissa. Disregarding the love triangle theory, detectives now started to link the case with another homicide just 30 miles away that had happened just 5 months before the Superbike Motorsports homicide. On May 16, 2003, the people of Greer, South Carolina heard the news of a triple homicide that took place in the Blue Ridge Savings Bank. Sylvia Holtzclaw was on duty that day, though she had a day off. Soon, a local couple, E.B. and Maggie Barnes, visited the bank. At around 1:30 p.m., a 911 call went through to the Greer Police Department regarding a shooting that had taken place in the Blue Ridge Savings Bank, where Sylvia, E.B. and Maggie were shot to death. Just like in the Superbike Motorsports, the shooting happened in broad daylight with no witnesses available. When police checked the CCTV footage, they saw a red car that was driving to the bank at around 1:24 p.m. and it was soon seen again when it was driving back from the bank 3 minutes after the incident. Coincidentally, a similar red car was spotted during the quadruple homicide at the Superbike Motorsports. Detectives started to hunt down the right car and found a clue that it was stolen by 39-year-old Emerson Wright from a rental lot days before the homicide. The police concluded that he'd entered the bank to rob, but panicked and shot the couple when they tried to intervene. Unfortunately, the detectives never got to question Emerson regarding the bank and the Superbike Motorsports murder because of how incidents unfurled 2 years later in another car chase involving him and the Georgia State Police. He was wanted for a series of burglaries in the Atlanta area. When he was chased by the state trooper, he crashed his car, got out, and shot himself with a single gunshot wound to his head. Later, the detectives declared that though there are similarities between the two cases, they didn't believe that the two cases were connected. Left with no clues or possible theories to continue their investigation, the quadruple homicide at the Superbike Motorsports turned into a cold case months later in 2004. For 13 years, Melissa, along with the other families of the victims, didn't stop with their efforts of finding any clue that might lead them to the person who was responsible for this atrocious crime, but to no avail. Finally, a ray of hope shone on them when the cold case of the quadruple murder that took place on November 6, 2003 in Superbike Motorsports reopened when the detectives got a breakthrough in the case in 2016, 13 years after the crime had been committed. The man behind the shooting came into the spotlight when he was arrested for a different murder that he committed, and during the interrogation, he confessed to the Superbike Motorsports quadruple murder. This man was 45-year-old Todd Colehemp. Todd was born on March 7, 1971, to mother Reggie Tagg and father William Samsel. His parents divorced when he was 2 years old, and though he started to live with his mother and a new boyfriend, he wanted to spend more time with his biological father. Todd was extremely aggressive and hyper, at times not having self-resistance over his anger issues. He was a troublesome kid and showed hostility towards animals when he was in nursery school. He killed a goldfish with Clorox bleach and shot a dog with a BB gun. He spent 3.5 months in Georgia Psychiatric Hospital, but there seemed to be no change in his aggressive behavior. His mother, Reggie, finally decided to send him to his father, William, hoping a change in the environment would help his behavior. On November 25, 1986, Todd planned a kidnapping of a girl named Christy Granado in Tempe, Arizona. He knocked on her door, frightened her with a .22 caliber revolver, and demanded for her to follow him to his house. He brought her to his home, tied her up, taped her mouth shut, and then proceeded to assault her. Afterwards, he walked her home and threatened to kill the entire family if she told anyone about what had happened. Christy, however, confessed everything to her parents, and her father called 911 immediately. Colehemp was charged with kidnapping, sexual assault, and committing a dangerous crime against children. In 1987, he pleaded guilty to the kidnapping charge, and the other charges were dropped. When he was released, Todd was a changed man. He started to work for himself and even got a job. No further complaints were heard against him until 2016. On August 31, 2016, 30-year-old Calla Brown and her boyfriend, the 32-year-old Charlie David Carver, went missing after they were last seen going to Todd's house to remove brush from one of Todd's properties. On November 3, 2016, investigators found Calla chained to a wall inside a metal storage container on the property of Todd. Later, investigators also retrieved the body of Charlie that had multiple gunshot wounds in it. Calla told the detectives that Todd shot Charlie and took her chained up. He would always assault her in a barbaric manner and threatened her not to find ways to escape. Todd was immediately arrested by the police and taken in for questioning. During this arrest, Todd confessed to being the person behind the shooting that took place at the Superbike Motorsports 13 years earlier. When Todd was called in for the interrogation on November 5, 2016, he started to tell the detectives everything that happened on November 6, 2003. He didn't confess out of fear or guilt, but merely as if recalling a memory. He said that he bought a Suzuki GSX R750 from Superbike Motorsports, but just days after buying the bike, he realized he couldn't ride it. Having no prior knowledge of riding a bike, Todd then decided to exchange the bike for another one that would be much easier to ride for a beginner such as Todd. He then told the detective that he was mocked by Scott and Brian for his inability to ride such a bike. The bike exchange didn't take place that day and Todd returned home. 14 days after the purchase, the bike got stolen from the front of the apartment complex where Todd lived. He filed a police complaint regarding the stolen bike, but the police never recovered the vehicle. Todd also mentioned that even the law enforcement officer made fun of him. He lost a $1,000 deposit for insurance, but neither the police nor the shop contacted him after that regarding the stolen bike. Todd started college and went to Greenville Tech. His attraction towards bikes never faded, and soon he found himself going back to the Superbike Motorsports once again. He told the police that when he was browsing through the bikes in the shop, both Scott and Brian were giving negative remarks about him. Since then, whenever Todd visited the shop, the two men would mock and laugh at him. One day, he decided to take up a red 92 FS with him when he went to the shop. He waited for the customers to leave, and the shop was left with only Scott, Brian, Chris, and Beverly. Todd savagely shot all the victims to death. He later added that Beverly was not a target. She was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Hearing the confession made by Todd gave the victims' families the long-drawn justice and the closure that they were seeking for the past. Later, Todd also confessed to have killed 3 more people who were Johnny Joe, Megan Lee Coxey, and Charlie David Carver. These 3 victims also died due to gunshots fired by Todd Colehemp. In the case of Todd Colehemp, even though it was a serial killer case, there was no trial that took place. Instead, prosecutors spoke to the families of those he'd murdered as well as to the survivor and decided to give him a plea deal instead of taking him to trial, where the state offered Todd life without the possibility of parole, which he accepted only 7 months after his arrest. Todd was sentenced to 7 consecutive life sentences on May 23, 2017. In addition, he was sentenced to 30 years for assault and 30 years for kidnapping. Not having a trial did not give the satisfaction to the victims' families regarding the justice that was needed to be served. It also angered the general public. It's not fair for families to wait years and years for justice, 7th Circuit Solicitor Barry Barnett later told reporters. But Scott Ponder's wife Melissa said that she was finally relieved to get closure regarding her husband's death after all these years. All the family members and relatives of the victims came together to hold the Canda Lake Vigil in remembrance of their beloved, ones whom they'd lost to the hands of a serial killer. After 13 drawn-out years of pain and suffering, the victims' families were grateful to finally learn what exactly happened to their loved ones. In one interview, Scott's wife Melissa did state that the reason Todd gave for murdering Scott and the others didn't sit right with her, since she knew Scott well enough to know that he'd never make fun of someone and make them feel little in front of him. Nevertheless, she was grateful that justice had finally been served. The public was left disturbed by the lack of empathy and the casual behavior that Todd showed while being interrogated by the police or during his court appearances. They wanted Todd to receive the death penalty since he was a monster to society. Today's case was truly a twisted and disturbing one. The Inman family projected an image of perfect harmony to those on the outside. They were regular churchgoers every Sunday to All Woodport Sing. Yet within their tight-knit circle, one could fathom what really happened behind closed doors. Back in 3, William and Sandra Inman's paths crossed at church. He was 18, she just 16. Their union received their parents' blessing, leading to marriage. The couple made their home in the modest community of Logan, located in Hocking County, Ohio. Bill Inman possessed strong religious convictions and balanced his job in construction with playing musical instruments for the Sky of Faith Evangelical Church in Nelsonville, Ohio. Sandra took on the role of managing the household. In 1984, they were delighted to welcome their son, William Jr., to distinguish between father and son. The head of the family was called Bill, while the younger one was known as Will. As time passed, William Jr. grew up. At age 17 in 2001, he met a 15-year-old named Summer Cook at church, quite reminiscent of his parents' encounter. Will and Summer maintained a friendship for 3 years before getting married when Summer turned 18 in 2004. The newlyweds began their life together by residing with Will's parents in a spacious house in Logan, Ohio. In that same year, when Bill reached the age of 39, he envisioned himself as a spiritual guide. Transforming his garage into a makeshift sanctuary, he began hosting gatherings there. Despite local skepticism towards the self-declared minister's actions, his enigmatic garage started to attract neighbors first, then their friends, and more individuals seeking solace through prayer and leaving offerings. By 2005, Will and Summer were overjoyed with the birth of their son Alex. Around this time, financial strains began affecting the Inman household since Bill's religious endeavors were not financially rewarding. This situation led the family to consider relocating to another state in pursuit of better employment opportunities. By 2006, the Inman family had fully resettled in Florida. Both Bill and Will promptly secured employment in hotel construction. Meanwhile, Sandra and Summer dedicated themselves to homemaking and nurturing young Alex. 2 years later, the Inmans made their way back to Ohio from Florida. By then, they had forfeited their Logan home due to an inability to reclaim it and settled in a rental in Vinton's countryside. Starting a new chapter shortly after their relocation, in 2008, and Summer welcomed their second child, a daughter named Kelly. By 2010, their family grew with the arrival of another daughter, Alana. As young parents, Will and Summer often sought weekends away for relaxation and rejuvenation. During these times, Bill and Sandra, always supportive, took on the role of caring for their grandchildren. The weekends were filled with joy as they cherished moments with their 3 grandchildren. In the spring of 2010, Bill Inman secured a pastor's license and proclaimed himself the head of the Skinnier Faith Church. Alongside his wife, he established a charitable entity named Ranch of Mercy to assist the jobless and homeless. His vision was grand. He wanted to construct a large dwelling for orphans and widows. However, financial resources were quite lacking. To address this issue, Bill conceived a lottery scheme. Each participant would purchase a ticket with proceeds earmarked for building the shelter. The grand prize was either a house or $200,000 plus 99 other significant rewards. The community became aware of this lottery through news and advertisements. Bill initially promoted it door to door, assuring participants of lavish rewards while emphasizing that surplus funds were destined for providing a haven for the destitute. Priced at $10 per ticket, Bill managed to sell 100,000 tickets, amassing $1 million for the project. The drawing was set for September 2010. In June 2010, personal upheaval struck the Inman family when Summer expressed her desire to divorce Will after 6 years of marriage. This declaration came not long after she had penned a significant entry in her personal diary. "I am utterly exhausted from constantly trying to please everyone around me. Do not deserve happiness. Do I not have the right to love someone and feel that love in return? I'm uncertain if now is the appropriate time, but I feel compelled to share everything with Will. Troubles me deeply, yet he deserves to know the truth. He should be aware that I no longer wish to be with him. I need to be alone to rediscover myself and understand my current identity. At this moment, I feel like a servant, perpetually running around and obeying others. I adore my children with all my heart, and would never trade them for anything. However, I don't want them to grow up witnessing their mother merely following orders all the time. I'm unsure how Will might react to this revelation. There's a chance he could become angry, attempt to take the children away, or worse, resort to threats or harm. It's important for our children to see us as equals. I'm aware that Will's parents might turn against me and try to convince me to stay, but such actions won't change anything. Last night, when Will asked me what I wanted, my mind was blank. All I could think of was what I don't want. I don't want to feel unhappy and trapped any longer, but I couldn't bring myself to voice these thoughts. So instead, I sat there in silence. Every day feels like a battle. All I yearn for is rest, to cry and sleep without interruption. but finding a way out of the situation seems impossible at times. My hope is that by the time of my next journal entry, I'll have clarity on how to resolve everything. As the summer progressed, we moved forward with the divorce proceedings. Departing from the Inman residence, I took our son and both daughters along with my personal belongings. We sought refuge at my parents' home. Wanting not to disrupt the children's relationship with their father or grandparents, visits were scheduled regularly for them. 2 months following our separation in August 2010, I began a relationship with Adam Peters while also securing employment at a bank in Logan's downtown area, working in a cleaning capacity due to limited educational background. When September arrived, it marked another significant event, the Ranch of Mercy's house raffle, spearheaded by the Inman family. Although construction on the prize house was supposed to begin, both September and October passed without any progress. No raffle took place, and no explanations were given. The organization didn't seem to rush to refund participants either. By December 1st, 2010, the Inmans got a notice requiring them to leave their rented residence due to significant unpaid rent. In response, Summer and Adam went to collect her remaining belongings from the Inman home. However, they were denied entry. This led Summer to call the police, reporting that her estranged husband was intimidating her and preventing her from retrieving her possessions. When the police arrived, and his parents continued to block access, Will even escalated matters by threatening Adam and clashing with an officer. Consequently, Summer filed a legal complaint against Will. She reflected on their relationship, recalling how idyllic it seemed before marriage, but lamenting its drastic change afterward. Will's behavior reportedly became very controlling, affecting everything from her diet to household responsibilities and even intimate aspects of their life. She wasn't allowed to sleep without his approval and was confined at home without access to her phone or keys. Summer revealed Will's aspirations for a large family, his interest in polygamy, and his activities on related websites, including posting inappropriate images. She also disclosed threats he made if she pursued divorce, and mentioned how her cats mysteriously disappeared, attributed their disappearance nonchalantly to them escaping through an open window. Following Summer's allegations, Will provided his version of events. He justified taking Summer's phone and keys by suggesting he suspected her of infidelity. Regarding the cats, he said that due to their wild behavior and damage caused to furniture and family members, he relocated them to a shelter. As a result of these conflicts and accusations, Will was subjected to a restraining order, preventing him from approaching Summer, and faced penalties and probation amidst further investigations. A fierce battle for custody emerged between the families. The Inmans filed police report against Adam Peters, labeling him a potential threat to the safety of Alex Kelly and Alana. Tragically, Summer's life took a dark turn. On the night March 22, 2011, Summerman, just 25 years old, was finishing her shift at the bank. She wrapped up her cleaning duties after the office had closed. Around 11 p.m., she stepped outside to dispose of the trash. Summer had texted her partner Adam to meet her after work, but he didn't find her by 11:30 p.m. Worried, Adam arrived at the bank and began his search. He discovered her personal items scattered near a dumpster in an alley, her phone, keys, and a music player still playing with headphones nearby in the grass. Her jacket lay there too. Alarmed, Adam immediately contacted Summer's parents to inform them of her disappearance and stressed the need to alert the police swiftly. Initially, Summer's parents called the bank, guessing she might have stayed longer for extra work and misplaced her belongings. Security personnel had no clues about her whereabouts. They then contacted Logan police to report Summer missing, emphasizing her punctuality and that she rarely stayed late at work. Police arrived at the scene where they found Summer's belongings. They heard accounts from 3 eyewitnesses who saw her abduction about an hour earlier. 2 women out for an evening jog reported seeing Summer as she threw out the trash. At that moment, a white Ford Crown Victoria, driven by a blonde woman, 2 individuals dressed in black balaclavas exited the vehicle and forcefully grabbed Summer, shoving her into the back seat despite her resistance and cries for help. One bystander's attempt to intervene was thwarted when the female driver incapacitated him with pepper spray, forcing him to retreat. The car quickly left the area. The 2 jogging witnesses immediately headed to the nearest police station to report what they had witnessed. Their account initially faced skepticism from the police, who found their narrative peculiar and doubted its authenticity. Expecting it might be a fabricated story. The police reached the abduction site of Summer Inman just an hour after her parents filed the missing person report. However, initial efforts did not lead to locating the missing 25-year-old. News of Summerman's kidnapping quickly circulated through all local media outlets, capturing the community's attention. Hundreds of Logan's residents united in a concerted effort to locate her. As 3 days elapsed, the possibility of finding Summer safe and sound grew increasingly faint. Throughout this harrowing time, her parents endeavored to maintain hope against despairing thoughts. Shortly before her disappearance, Summer Inman shared a photo on Facebook featuring herself, her new partner Adam, and her children. The image portrayed them as a content family unit. Will Inman, who had access to Adam Peters' Facebook page, surprisingly still on his friends list despite being Summer's current partner, noticed this update. It raises an intriguing question. Why would a husband befriend his wife's new companion? The backstory revealed that Adam, a man without stable employment, had been hired by the Inmans a year earlier, in spring 2010, for various household tasks. It was then that Adam and Summer crossed paths and developed a bond. Despite initial reluctance, Summer eventually reciprocated Adam's affections. Her diary entry reflects this internal conflict. My mind screamed, "Run, get out of here now." But instead I stayed and let him embrace me and then delve deeper. I am very sorry about this. I am guilty. This encounter signified the unraveling of Summer's life within the Inman family. Yearning for happiness and love, she initiated divorce proceedings which were prolonged 5 days before vanishing. Will tested the proposed spousal support per child monthly, suggesting a reduction to $50, given his annual earnings of just $6,000. Will and his parents sought full custody of the children, but their petition was rejected by the court. After losing contact with their grandchildren, Bill and Sandra visibly deteriorated. They lost weight and were clearly affected, as those who knew them concurred that the grandchildren were the light of their lives. In March 2011, amidst the investigation into Summer's disappearance, the Inman family was located. They were found at the residence of Bill's 70-year-old mother in Jackson, Ohio. Bill, Sandra, and Will collectively asserted their ignorance regarding Summer's abduction. The Inmans recounted that on the night of Summer's kidnapping, they were en route to Cleveland to view a new property. However, they encountered car trouble after 3 hours on the road, leading to an overnight ordeal of vehicular repairs on the roadside before returning to Logan the next morning. They maintained that their interactions with Summer were generally amicable with infrequent disputes. Yet they attributed a shift in their familial harmony to Adam Peters' employment in their household, describing this phase as challenging. The trio consistently portrayed Adam as a negative influence, alleging he was the catalyst for the disintegration of their previously harmonious and tightly knit family. The investigation took a crucial turn when police noticed a white Ford Crown Victoria at the Inman family's residence. Upon inspection of the vehicle, a GPS receiver was confiscated. Subsequent examination revealed that on March 22nd, the day Summer was abducted, this car was in Logan. The GPS was deactivated at 5:30 p.m. that evening and reactivated the next morning again in Logan, contradicting the Inman's claim of traveling to Cleveland. Phone records further corroborated that all 3 family members were in Logan on both March 22nd and 23rd. Additional inquiries revealed that on the morning of March 23rd, around 7:30 a.m., the Inmans were at a car wash engaging in a thorough interior cleaning of a vehicle. Bill, Sandra, and Will were all present, but Summer was notably absent following this event. They visited an auto shop in Cleveland for a tire change. While there, a shop employee noticed something odd. Bill was choosing to replace nearly new tires with used ones, simply because he didn't like his current set change. There was also evidence that the Inmans attempted to modify the car's appearance. Notably, Bill had removed a police spotlight that had previously been mounted on the driver's side door, next to the mirror. Bill, Sandra, and Will Inman were apprehended and brought in for interrogation. Prior to their arrest, Bill assured his elderly mother of their innocence, attributing the situation to a test from the devil. Throughout the questioning, they consistently claimed they were unaware of Summer Inman's abduction and didn't know who the kidnapper was. However, after several hours and faced with the possibility of capital punishment if convicted, Sandra Inman's resolve faltered. Eventually, she disclosed the truth. Sandra confessed that they were responsible for Summer's abduction on the night of March 22nd. She detailed how Bill and Will had disguised themselves in black masks. Sandra admitted that her initial plan was merely to abduct and intimidate Summer. However, events took an unexpected and tragic turn. According to Sandra's confession, when Summer was forcibly placed in the car's backseat, Will restrained her with plastic ties around her neck, hands, and feet, intending merely to frighten her into granting him access to their children. As the situation escalated, Will realized that Summer was on the brink of unconsciousness. He panicked and desperately searched for a knife to release her, shouting frantically to his mother, "Oh my God, Mom, where's the knife? I can't find it." Amidst their collective fear and desperate search for the knife, the situation worsened. Summer ceased breathing and tragically passed away. Sandra maintained that their objective was never to take Summer's life. They merely sought a resolution to their custody dispute and hoped to ensure regular visits with their grandchildren. On March 29, 2011, a week after the kidnapping, Sandra Inman disclosed the location of the body. Summer's remains were found in a septic tank on the grounds of Skinnier Faith Church near Nelsonville, about 30 kilometers from her workplace. Bill Inman had been involved in the church's construction. This place held personal significance for him and Sandra, as it was where they had married 28 years earlier. The Inmans were regulars at this church. Bill participated in its musical ensemble. Police uncovered the well by removing a concrete slab and unscrewing 6 bolts from the metal lid. When they opened it, they immediately saw Summer's legs. She had been thrown headfirst into the septic tank, still wearing her work attire. Her black t-shirt bore an ironic inscription, "I don't have anger issues, I have issues with idiots." A forensic examination confirmed that Summer had succumbed to strangulation. Apart from marks on her neck, hands, and legs indicating she'd been restrained, no other injuries were found on her body. This highlighted strangulation as the cause of her tragic demise. Sandra revealed that she originally planned to dispose of the body in a river, but reconsidered and decided it would be safer to conceal it in the well near the church. She believed this location would ensure it remained undiscovered for a long time. Sandra admitted to feeling deep shame for her actions and their irreversible consequences. During the subsequent trial, 49-year-old Bill Inman and 28-year-old Will Inman did not take any responsibility for Summer's death. Throughout the proceedings, they stayed mostly silent, showing no visible emotions and avoiding eye contact with Summer's grieving parents. Sandra Inman, at 47 years old, stood out as the only family member who accepted responsibility for her part in the tragic events. She maintained that the plan to intimidate Summer was entirely her own idea. In a deeply emotional moment before sentencing, Sandra, overcome with tears, faced Summer's parents and begged for their forgiveness. Her speech, though broken by sobs and a quivering voice, clearly expressed remorse. Sandra admitted she saw Summer as a daughter and regretted her catastrophic decision. In 2012, the verdict was handed down. All 3 members of the Inman family were convicted. Bill and Will Inman received life sentences without the possibility of parole. Sandra Inman also got a life sentence but with eligibility for parole after serving 15 years. However, among friends and church members familiar with the family's dynamics, doubts arose about Sandra being the mastermind behind the crime. It was commonly known that Bill had a dominant role in the family and usually made final decisions on all matters. Will, on his part, was seen as a pampered child whose desires were always met by his parents. Those close to the family speculated that Sandra's confession might have been a strategic move to reduce legal consequences for her husband and son. Currently, Alex and Alana are being raised by Summer's family. For quite some time, it was hard to explain to these grandchildren where their mother, father, grandmother, and grandfather had gone. A garbage collector was paralyzed on January 22, 2023, after sifting through a trash container near Columbia Park to find what was at the bottom of it. A blue suitcase was inside, sealed with black tape, and surrounded by several garbage bags. The suitcase contained a woman's body, which was easily identified because her head was visible from the suitcase. The worker was frightened upon finding something, so he drove several blocks and reported it to the police. The Capitol Police promptly dispatched a team of officers to investigate. Can you provide some examples? The police officers who arrived were met with a horrifying scene. The corpse was cradled in the suitcase and taken away. Valentina Tres Palacios was identified as the victim a few hours later. At the outset, the body was found to be free from any indications of violence, firearms, or knives, and it was not dismembered. Can you provide some examples? After opening the suitcase, detectives discovered that the woman was wearing pajamas with a belt, suggesting that she had been attacked while sleeping by the person who killed her. A black cardboard box on the side of the suitcase contained items that helped identify the body. Police found a student ID, a password used by the victim when applying for a certificate, as well as some documents and personal belongings among them. The investigating team found it peculiar as the presence of documents in such cases was not typical. Can you provide some examples? The police contacted the woman's family after finding the suitcase with her body, and they confirmed that she was with friends on Saturday, January 21st. The woman was found to have been struck multiple times in the head during the forensic examination. Her body was found with multiple injuries, including bleeding from the right part of her tongue and 5 cuts around her neck that indicated strangulation. Valentina Tres Palacios was born on December 16, 2001, in Bogota, Colombia. She was enrolled in the Faculty of Commerce and International Business. The girl was a music enthusiast from an early age. After completing her professional DJ diploma, she was granted access to work as a DJ in Colombia due to her exceptional talent and musical sense. She had a career that began 3 years ago and resulted in many foreign friends. Valentina traveled to other countries where she typically gained knowledge or exhibited her accomplishments. She had the chance to perform alongside some of the most renowned musicians during this period. She toured over 20 cities in the country and was present at significant international events of this kind. Her past activities involved performing at festivals and touring throughout Colombia, Chile, Mexico, Brazil, and Peru. People in her vicinity claimed that she had a bright future ahead. She was sought after and traveled throughout the nation. She dominated the best nightclubs and pursued her passion. Valentina was a very happy, smiling young girl who enjoyed the party. She maintained social media accounts where she shared her stage performances and always kept her followers informed about her daily routine. Can you provide some examples? In the electronic music industry of Colombia, she was recently recognized as the best amateur DJ. The girl shared about 2 things on her social media: her rising popularity in the electronic music industry at nightclubs, and her relationship with an American named John Poulos, whom she met online by the end of 2021. John and Valentina's communication skills improved as time passed. Valentina's initial desire for stability and commitment was not strong, but her relationship with him transformed into a romantic partnership that the young people eventually shared. John Poulos was a resident of America. Valentina was so invested in her life that he sent her money to attend the cosmetic course that involved injecting her lips with hyaluronic acid. The procedure was repeated to improve her cheekbones, and John also suggested surgery and silicone breast implants for his partner, modifying her appearance within a few months and becoming the talk of the town. He started sending money to the girl on a regular basis and eventually came up with the idea of marrying her. Originally, Poulos had plans to move to Colombia and live with Valentina, but she was skeptical because this person was so envious that he hired a private detective to track all her contacts and activities. Valentina's family was highly suspicious as she expressed her concern about this situation. John Poulos was prepared to spend the rest of his life with his partner by January 2023. He was committed to marrying Valentina and initiated the process of organizing the necessary paperwork. He rented an apartment in the northern area of Bogota, where he planned to spend the weekends with the girl until they found a permanent place to live. On Thursday, January 19th, Poulos arrived in Bogota. Around 8:53 p.m., he was caught on surveillance footage entering the building's apartment. Along with him, there was a blue suitcase that bore resemblance to the one used to find Valentina's corpse. John Poulos was the first person to be noticed after the disturbing discovery, as he was also the last one to have seen Valentina alive. The detective's attempt to reach him resulted in the call being diverted to voicemail. Valentina's family members found Poulos to be a kind and collected individual. His demeanor was undeniable, and his plans to marry the young woman were evident. They were unable to fathom his involvement in this terrible crime, but these doubts were eliminated when investigators arrived at the apartment rental building, where it was discovered that the man had already left and was not found. On Monday, January 23rd, John Poulos took down his social media profiles in the early morning following Valentina's death. He was the sole suspect at that point. The revelation was made evident when investigators analyzed the surveillance camera footage in the building. From Friday evening to early Sunday morning, the Colombian police and prosecutor's office examined hours of video footage from cameras in the areas where the young woman and her boyfriend were. The trash container was where the body was disposed of at this point. The footage and numerous WhatsApp conversations were instrumental in uncovering the girl's final hours. On January 20th, Valentina and Poulos made a deal to meet. Can you provide some examples? The man arrived on the 19th, the day before, and took up residence in the apartment where the couple had planned to live. After he texted Valentina, they started arguing on the same night because she was at a party with her friend and didn't anticipate him coming over. He inquired about the presence of significant individuals at the gathering and whether she was with any male. She wryly replied with a no, stating that it was his suspicions, and they had agreed to meet on the 20th. Prior to meeting John, Valentina had planned to visit various locations to care for herself, apply her lash extensions, and attend hair salons. On January 20th, the couple were unable to see each other due to their disagreement, and only in the evening, when Valentina's apartment was being monitored by surveillance cameras, did they know exactly when they were in that parking lot. The girls' possessions were being packed by John at 6 p.m. as the two of them moved to another apartment and began a new life. Valentina's journey across the country was marked by a series of emotional goodbyes, one of which was with her family and friends. She made a video call to her mother saying that she was going home. The video depicts the girl accompanied by Poulos, who hired a vehicle to transport Valentina's possessions. They were caught on surveillance footage entering the apartment with their possessions at 7 p.m. Valentina sent her mother a series of videos showing the apartment in their frequent exchanges to get things. The cameras captured them completing the move and engaging in other activities before heading back to their new home. It was Saturday, January 21st at 1 a.m. Around 3 a.m., the couple arranged a taxi to go to southeastern New York's nightclub, where Valentina was set to perform 2 hours later. Can you provide some examples? The club was reached by them at approximately 4 a.m. Valentina commenced work almost immediately. While she was busy, John Poulos remained with her. Can you provide some examples? At approximately 5 a.m., her performance concluded. Valentina and John, holding hands, headed to the nightclub's office. They encountered the proprietor of the establishment, his spouse, and her companion. Valentina's friends had not seen her since they left the venue at 6 a.m. Her smile was back on her face, shining brightly, and everything seemed to be going smoothly. Valentina contacted her friend on the phone and stated that she had no intention of going anywhere on Saturday. She stated that she would probably stay in the apartment with her partner. Later on, they might go out to eat or cook together at their house. The last time Valentina spoke to her friend was at 9 p.m., and it was through video. Valentina's mother, Laura Hidalgo, revealed that her 13-year-old son was the final individual to converse with her on video. The girl was in bed with John. They both appeared to be in a state of happiness. The family had no further information about them. On January 21st, at 10:43 p.m., surveillance cameras in the building captured the young woman and her boyfriend. In the video, Valentina can be seen peering out of the apartment door while John stands in front of it. He seems contemplative and a little menacing, pacing back and forth, occasionally grimacing his face. He orders the elevator to go down and retrieve a delivery. Poulos was captured by the cameras again on Sunday, January 22nd at 9 a.m. He exits the room with 2 bags of garbage. Valentina was nowhere to be found on this occasion. The man drives to the parking area, takes a silver car, and places the bags in the back seat. Following that, he goes back to the apartment and retrieves 2 suitcases from the trunk. Subsequently, he heads back to the apartment. A gray blanket covers the suitcase that Poulos removed from the apartment where the clerk reads 10 a.m. He put it into a cart for shipping. A second bag was situated beside it. Valentina's head was wrapped in the blanket. The man surveys the parking area after parking. He perceives that nobody is in the vicinity. Moving ahead, he looks over to make sure nobody is going down in the elevator. Subsequently, he rapidly makes his way back to the vehicle. He glances at the mirror one last time and takes a sip of water before struggling to lift the heavy suitcase, which he puts in the trunk. The bag is the next item on the list. Subsequently, he takes control of the vehicle and departs. Surveillance cameras caught the car at different locations throughout the city around noon. It was evident that the subject was in search of a suitable spot to leave the suitcase. The car entered one of the parks and parked near the garbage containers at approximately 3 p.m. The driver exited and headed towards the container at that juncture. He surveyed the area, verified that no one was watching, and then removed the suitcase, which seemed excessive, before tossing it into the container. He went back to the car and removed the bag, which he then placed in the trash bin, closed the lid, and exited. The vehicle was traveling westward until it reached El Dorado International Airport. John's last known whereabouts were at the airport at 4:30 p.m. A $1 million reward was announced by the Ministry of Security on Monday, January 23rd for any information that could lead to the arrest of the person or persons responsible for the murder of Valentina Tres Palacios. The Colombian authorities enlisted the help of Interpol to issue an arrest warrant as Poulos fled the country's border without indicating why. Additionally, He was the final person to witness the girl's existence. Can you provide some examples? On January 24th, the National Police of Panama stated that they had apprehended Poulos at El Dorado International Airport while he was traveling to Turkey. In an effort to obtain answers about Valentina's death, Colombian authorities quickly began the process of deporting him to the country. Over 14 criminal investigation specialists contributed to the investigation, collecting evidence to establish the facts. The analysis of over 300 hours of video footage from cameras was the outcome of methodological work carried out in partnership with the country's prosecutor office. The case yielded another crucial finding after the arrest of this individual. Valentina's mobile phone was discovered near the El Dorado International Airport by a security staff member. He stumbled upon a mobile phone on the grass while walking near a tenth-of-a-minute gas station and picked it up. The man brought the discovered gadget home after he realized that it did not have a SIM card. He took the phone to sell it, unaware that it belonged to Valentina. The security guard's wife called him hours later in despair when she realized that the photo of the girl in the wallpaper on the mobile phone was identical to those seen on social media and also for the young woman found dead in the trash container. Unfortunately, the phone had already been marked for sale and repackaged because someone was willing to buy it. Therefore, information that could have been advantageous in this situation went unguarded. Can you provide some examples? Following that, the driver of the car that the couple had driven to the nightclub gave his testimony, which was followed by a big question. The driver was tasked with transporting the couple to a nightclub located in the southern part of the city. Before getting into the car, Poulos paused for a moment before Valentina exited. She got into the car and screamed that she had written something untoward. The driver looked at her in disbelief before checking his phone and finding out that Tres Palacios had sent him a message to customer care, warning him in Spanish that he was in danger. The driver looked at the girl and inquired if she was all right, but her response was uncertain as Poulos entered the car and asked. She said, "Are you okay?" John and Valentina conversed in English as the car was being driven, and the man asked if they were bilingual, to which he replied with a positive answer. Poulos remained silent and instead corresponded with Valentina on WhatsApp. Upon leaving about 4 a.m., the driver went to the nightclub with the couple and then forgot about the incident until he was informed of the young woman's death several days later. Due to Valentina's open WhatsApp session, her friend who lived in Cartagena came to the prosecutor office in Bogota and surrendered their computer with the chats providing clues about what had occurred. One of the pieces of evidence found in Valentina's chat was that her friend had spotted a suitcase with her body, which was said to have been there. The friend said that on the same day Valentina was in Bogota, she got a text from Poulos and received several selfies with his luggage. The suitcase that John brought with him was akin to the one found by authorities in the container. The color was indistinguishable. There's no clear answer as to why the young girl left her WhatsApp session open on her friend's computer, but all of these texts helped authorities get what happened that night when Valentina was killed. It was determined by forensic investigators that she died from asphyxiation caused by being tightly strangled with a rope. Prior to her passing, there were indications on her body that she had been a victim of violence. All indications from the forensic examination indicate that Valentina Tres Palacios passed away while sleeping. This conclusion was drawn up by criminalists because she was wearing pajamas. There was no doubt in the evidence above that John Poulos was present. The indictment stated that the suspect did not acknowledge responsibility for the girl's death, citing the current situation and the concealment of evidence. Rather, he said, "There were violations when I was arrested in Panama because we did not have a lawyer to talk to." Poulos' Spanish language skills were not strong enough to warrant a translator, and the hearing lasted for more than 5 hours. The crime committed by Poulos is attributed to his involvement with Valentina, and he attempted to disappear without a trace, erasing his social media accounts after the incident. On May 19, 1987, John Poulos was born in Wisconsin, United States. He had 3 children and was previously wedded in his native land. His criminal record included charges of violence against women, including obtaining a restraining order against his ex-wife. The use of pornographic websites was reported by a woman to whom John Poulos had sent money who claimed that this person was actively browsing. According to her, he spent approximately 5-6 hours daily on the site, and she mentioned that despite being a man, his behavior was often bizarre in nature, such as fantasizing and recounting ghost stories. Another model who testified on a modeling page said she knew the American from Texas, America. She ceased writing to him after a peculiar comment he made, which included the words jealousy and death. John's question was, "If I were at a bar, would you be willing to talk to me?" The girl refused in response. "It's likely that one of us will die due to jealousy," replied Poulos. The witness stated that despite the subject having sent money to the magical lord, she never conversed with him on video because his communication was often unusual. It is important to acknowledge that John had certain conduct towards his victims. He contacted Valentina on social media and started sending her money with persistence and consistency in the case. This approach to women's treatment as property was a warning sign that the trusting women initially neglected, and Poulos believed he could purchase them with money from the outset. The factors were disregarded, leading to the possibility that the victim unintentionally stumbled into her abuser's trap and was eventually recognized due to his own mistake. The authorities involved in this case are assuming that John thought the waste disposal system in Colombia was equivalent to that in the United States, where he resided. According to him, the waste material had settled in the container and would eventually be disposed of. Poulos did not assume that recycling workers and street dwellers frequently sift through garbage to discover items that can be sold or employed as something. John Poulos is being held in a private cell in Bogotá today. Now all that remains is to demonstrate that all these pieces of evidence connect the individual to the crime and to discover the motive behind this dreadful murder. In Colombia, the criminal code provides for a prison sentence of up to 50 years for a crime in which an American is accused. With the assistance of a special group formed by the Capitol Police in coordination with the country's Attorney General's office, criminal investigators will be engaged in the search for material evidence to clarify this fact. Such cases once again demonstrate to us how dangerous social networks can be when getting to know someone. Valentina thought she had found love and someone with whom she would spend the rest of her days. However, this did not happen, and like many people in the world, she too thought that nothing like this would happen to her. The case of Athena Strand. Athena Strand was born on May 25, 2015 in the small town of Duncan, Oklahoma, USA. Her parents divorced and her father moved to Texas while Athena still lived with her mother in Oklahoma. Despite living far apart, her father kept in touch and visited her whenever possible. Sometimes her mother would bring Athena to see her father so they could spend time together. Both her parents remarried later and Athena had 2 younger sisters. Athena was a cheerful, sociable child. She loved to play and spend a lot of time outdoors. In the winter of 2022, when Athena was 7 years old, she temporarily left Oklahoma to live with her father in Texas until the New Year holidays ended. During this time, Athena attended a local elementary school. Her father's house was located in a remote rural area surrounded by forests and vast fields. Here, Athena had a great time exploring nature with her father and also built a good relationship with his new wife, Elizabeth. On November 30th, Athena returned home from school at around 4:15 p.m., just like every other day. She was home alone with her mother, Elizabeth, because her father and grandfather had gone hunting. That evening, Athena had an argument with Elizabeth. Athena finally felt upset and decided to go to her own room. Meanwhile, Elizabeth went to the kitchen to prepare dinner. After about 20 minutes, Elizabeth went to Athena's room to call her to dinner, but she was gone. She started searching the whole house, but couldn't find Athena anywhere. Elizabeth called the relative of her husband who lived nearby. Although Athena often visited the relatives, this time the relatives said that she was missing. Next, Elizabeth called her husband and told him about the situation. Her husband immediately asked her to contact the police and return home immediately. When she got home, Elizabeth called the 911 emergency number at around 640. Only 14 minutes later, the police arrived at her house. She explained the situation to the police and said that she thought Athena might have left home because of an argument between mother and child. Initially, the police seemed suspicious of Elizabeth because she had reported the child missing 40 minutes after discovering the incident. However, after listening to her description of the search around the house and contacting family members, they concluded that she might be telling the truth. The police immediately began searching the surrounding area. Although it was already dark, they still organized a search force within a radius of several kilometers around the house. They believed that the child might have gotten lost in the dark and needed urgent help. They focused on searching the entire area, including the woods and fields. Police also considered the possibility of kidnapping, but found no evidence to support this theory. There was no sign of an intruder in the house and no strange noises or screams that night. Police received support from family and town residents in their efforts to find the missing Athena. The girl's mother quickly arrived at the scene after learning of her daughter's disappearance. But the results were still inconclusive as no trace of Athena was found. The search became more difficult as the area around the house was quite difficult to access, especially at night. Therefore, the police continued the search at 7 a.m. the next morning with more police officers joining in. As news of the disappearance spread, hundreds of volunteers volunteered to join the search effort. Some came on horses and ATVs, while police used drones and helicopters equipped with thermal cameras to search for Athena. By the end of the day, Athena had still not been found. Police were concerned for her safety because of the cold weather at the beginning of winter. Although Texas is a small southern state, the temperature had dropped to 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Since the girl was wearing thin clothes, it would be really difficult to endure such weather. On the third day, the search continued, and the police expanded the area to search for Athena. The police became increasingly suspicious that Athena had left the house on her own. During these days, they searched for miles in all directions, but they could not find the girl. The police identified the people who were near Athena's house that night. However, Athena's house was located in a special location, far from the main road, and there were no surveillance cameras in the area. However, they quickly got some important clues. A courier service had delivered to Athena's house that evening. The police contacted the courier company and learned that the delivery to the address was entrusted to an outside contractor. They then contacted that contractor and determined that the truck had arrived at Athena's house. Each of these trucks was equipped with surveillance cameras, so the police asked for footage from November 30th. After rewinding the time the truck arrived at the house, the police saw the driver dragging a girl who looked like Athena into the car. The police quickly identified the driver as Tanner R., 31, and the police went to his address. Shortly thereafter, the man was arrested on suspicion of kidnapping and taken in for questioning. As soon as the police mentioned the video evidence, Tanner began to speak. He explained that he had actually delivered a package to Athena's house that evening. While backing up the truck, he heard a crash and went to check what had happened. There, he saw the girl lying on the ground and realized that he had accidentally hit her with his car. As he approached, Tanner noticed that the girl was not seriously injured. She was conscious and spoke to him calmly. The girl said her name was Athena. He started to feel scared. He decided to take her into the truck and try to figure out how to solve the problem. The girl continued to talk to him and said that she would tell her father about this. And Tanner became more and more worried. He didn't know what to do with the situation, because he knew that if she told an adult about the incident, he could get into legal trouble. According to Tanner, he could not think of a better way than to kill her. He thought the best way would be to break her neck, but he could not do it. He then strangled Athena to death with his hands. He hid Athena's body in a nearby river. Tanner gave the police the exact location where he left Athena, so the police went there and found Athena's body. The murder shocked not only her family, but also thousands of people across the country. All major media outlets reported the case, and many were horrified by the brutality. After the body was found, Tanner was charged with kidnapping and murder. While waiting for the medical examiner's report, the police scrutinized Tanner's identity, trying to better understand his motives. Tanner's account of the events did not seem plausible. According to Tanner, he lightly hit the girl with his heart valve, causing no serious injuries to her. However, Tanner was so depressed that he immediately decided to kill her, thinking that beating a child would cost him his job. Tanner's story seems very strange. Police found out that this man was engaged and had a 1-year-old child. In addition to delivering goods, he occasionally worked as an Uber driver. Tanner's daily life, he participated in performing in a band at several cafes in the nearby city of Fort Worth. On social media, he often posted photos with his son, snapshots during music performances, and other moments of his daily life. These images do not show that he was a cruel person. There is no information about his previous criminal record before his arrest. Police also found no indication that he might be a dangerous criminal. Meanwhile, Athena's parents filed a lawsuit against FedEx and the contracting company, accusing them of allowing Tanner to work. They called for higher standards for employee screening to prevent such crimes in the future. Police investigators said the package Tanner delivered that evening was a Christmas gift Athena's parents had ordered for her. It was a Barbie doll she had long wanted. However, when the results of the medical examination were released, the case became more complicated. Experts said Athena died within an hour of being kidnapped. Her body had suffered various degrees of injury, and the primary cause of her death was asphyxiation. Police then outlined a series of events that could have led to the incident. After an argument with her mother, Athena decided to go outside and stand in the yard. At this time, Tanner arrived to make a delivery and found her alone. According to this theory, he saw an opportunity to satisfy his lust. The area around Athena's house was quite isolated, and the police believe that Tanner may have tricked or deliberately attacked Athena to get her into the car without encountering any resistance. It is still unclear what happened next. There are two main possibilities that seem most plausible. First, Tanner may have planned to take Athena out of the house to carry out his evil intentions, but the girl started screaming or tried to escape. Fearing discovery, Tanner killed the girl and dumped her body in the river. Second, Tanner may have committed some kind of harassment against Athena that did not involve direct contact. In this case, medical experts would not find evidence of sexual assault. To learn more, police spent weeks digging into Tanner's past. They spoke to his relatives, friends, and acquaintances, looking for any signs that he might have been involved in other criminal activities. There was a major breakthrough in the investigation. The police found several people who said they had been assaulted by Tanner when they were children. However, the identities of these people have not been released to protect the investigation. One of Tanner's victims went public with her story of being assaulted by him when she was 16. She shared her story on social media in an attempt to gain attention. Surprisingly, Tanner faced no consequences for his actions and was not even considered a suspect for a long time. Sadly, the victim wrote that no one believed her during those years. However, after Tanner killed Athena, these allegations received more attention, exposing Tanner's true nature. Now Tanner will also face separate trials for 4 sexual assaults involving minors. In preparation for the trial, the government announced that they would seek the death penalty. Tanner himself has hired a lawyer to advise him to withdraw his confession and declare his innocence, but this is unlikely to help him avoid punishment, as the police have video footage from the truck as well as Tanner's testimony about the exact location of the body. We can only watch the trial unfold and wait for more details to become public. Hi everyone. Thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Elizabeth Nicole Forshee-Cyperta. Elizabeth was born on May 13, 1978 in Truckee, California. She lived with her parents and younger brother. When Elizabeth was 13, the Cyperta family moved across the street. Michael and Sally Cyperta had 2 young children and were struggling to balance work and family. Michael wanted Sally to go back to work, so they decided to find a babysitter. Michael suggested hiring Elizabeth, then 14, to babysit their children. Sally agreed, and Elizabeth began babysitting for the neighbor's family. Elizabeth grew attached to Michael and Sally's children as she spent more time with them. The children also enjoyed being around her. When Elizabeth was 15, her father passed away. Traumatic event that deeply affected her. According to her mother, Donna Forshee, Elizabeth became more sensitive and vulnerable after this event. She began to admire and grow closer to Michael Cyperta, seeing him as an ideal father figure. Elizabeth believes that Michael loves his children unconditionally and supports their interests. Elizabeth used to babysit Michael and Sally's children during the day. However, she started staying at their house until late at night. This continued for about 2 years. One day, Michael decided to move to Iowa with his family to be closer to his relatives. He invited Elizabeth to come along as a babysitter. Elizabeth's mother, Donna, strongly objected and tried to stop her daughter, even calling Child Protective Services to intervene. However, Donna's efforts were in vain. Elizabeth was too attached to Michael, Sally, and their 2 children. Although she was still in high school, she was determined to stick with her decision and move to Winfield, Iowa with Cyperta's family. After Elizabeth moved away, her mother Donna and her best friend Shannon Gerber maintained regular contact with her, either by phone or by weekly letters. Elizabeth graduated from high school in Iowa in May 1997. Donna attended her graduation and gave her daughter an emerald and diamond ring, which Elizabeth treasured. During this time, Michael divorced his wife, Sally, and began a relationship with Elizabeth. After the divorce, Sally left the children with Michael and Elizabeth and moved away. Although Sally maintained contact with her children, she cut off all contact with Michael and stopped speaking to Elizabeth. Michael, then in her 40s, immediately demonstrated his controlling nature. He limited what Elizabeth could and could not do, as well as who she could talk to. He attempted to control every aspect of Elizabeth's life. From the beginning, their relationship seemed dysfunctional. As a result, Elizabeth's mother and best friend Shannon found it increasingly difficult to contact her. Michael did not like Elizabeth talking to them and would often get angry if she did. As a result, Elizabeth would only dare to call they when Michael was not home. During this time, Elizabeth became friends with Harper Tracy through church. Harper noticed that Elizabeth had suffered 5 or 6 injuries during their friendship, including finger marks on her neck and bruises on her stomach. Harper's daughter, Sadie, who was about 7 years old, knew Michael's children through church and occasionally played at their home. Sadie remembers one time when she visited. She witnessed Michael pushing Elizabeth down the stairs and kneeling on her. Harper also remembers Elizabeth arriving at church in a state of panic and fear after fleeing a violent argument with Michael. Elizabeth confided that she was afraid of Michael and could not take any more abuse. Harper discovered multiple bruises on Elizabeth's stomach and marks on her arms. Elizabeth stayed in Harper's trailer for a month. During that time, Michael appeared near the trailer almost every day and acted threateningly. He would park his truck about 10 feet away from the trailer and tease Elizabeth. Specifically, he threatened her by saying that Elizabeth would be isolated and no one would find her if she did not listen to him. He left hazmat notices and a torn cat collar outside, along with a message warning that she would disappear like the cat if she did not return. He also threatened to harm the family's animals and began blackmailing her with videotapes and photos he had. According to Harper, he threatened to kill Elizabeth and dispose of her body 6 times. Harper called the police to stop him, but unfortunately, they were unsuccessful. There were clearly many warning signs about Michael. Everyone saw him as someone to stay away from. However, Elizabeth was young and naive, so she still hoped that Michael would change. Unfortunately, at the age of 40, people rarely change their behavior and attitude towards others. After a long time of pressure from Michael, eventually, Elizabeth decided to leave Harper's trail to live with Michael. They married in January 1998 in Mount Pleasant. Despite her attempts to prevent the marriage, Harper attended their wedding. Afterwards, Michael took the initiative to cut off all contact between Harper and Elizabeth. At Michael's request, Elizabeth finally told Harper not to come to their house anymore. Harper was not the only one concerned about Elizabeth and Michael's marriage. Elizabeth's mother, Donna, also disapproved of the relationship and refused to come to Iowa for her daughter's wedding. However, in June 2000, Elizabeth went to California to attend her younger brother's high school graduation. Although Michael stayed in Iowa, he continued to keep an eye on Elizabeth. During the 3 days Elizabeth stayed with her mother, Michael called her repeatedly. He was concerned that Donna was trying to influence Elizabeth not to return to Iowa. After each call, Elizabeth felt sad and confused. She considered leaving her husband but was not sure. To reassure Michael, Elizabeth moved out of her mother's house and moved in with Shannon Gerber, her childhood friend. Shannon had kept in touch with Elizabeth since Elizabeth moved to Iowa. They tried to talk every month, often calling when Michael was not home. However, Elizabeth's move to live with her friend did not lessen Michael's anger. Instead, he began harassing Shannon by calling her repeatedly. Most of the calls were threatening. Shannon recalled Michael threatening Elizabeth. He screamed at her and said he would kill her if she did not come home. Michael also threatened to kill Elizabeth's mother, younger brother, Shannon, and her young son. He called her constantly, day and night, sometimes dozens of times an hour. Finally, Shannon's husband couldn't take it anymore and turned off the phone. This clearly made Michael even angrier. Shannon begged Elizabeth not to return to Iowa. "I didn't want her to go because I was afraid I would never see her again," Shannon confided. She deliberately took a detour to the airport, hoping Elizabeth would miss her flight. However, the flight was delayed and Elizabeth was still able to catch it. After returning to Mount Pleasant, Iowa, Elizabeth began working at Experian. There, she met Sarah Thomas, a coworker who quickly became her best friend. Because Sarah lived near the Supura family home, she often took Elizabeth home after work. During these trips, they talked a lot and Elizabeth gradually trusted Sarah. She shared with Sarah about her difficult relationship with her husband, Michael, and even showed Sarah the bruises on her body that Michael had caused. Elizabeth and Sarah became very close to each other, close enough to cause problems. One day, while Michael was away, his 2 children peered through the bedroom keyhole and saw Sarah and Elizabeth getting intimate. When Elizabeth discovered that the children had witnessed the scene, she hastily packed up and moved in with Sarah. When Sarah's girlfriend, Terry, went outside to walk the dog, Michael came over and asked her to call Sarah's work phone and ask Elizabeth to return home. He had a bottle of alcohol in his hand, and his children were following him and crying. Michael explained that his wife had left him. She was not answering his calls, and he did not know what to do. When Elizabeth and Sarah entered the apartment, they saw Michael and Terry waiting for them. Frightened, Elizabeth and Sarah left. Michael shouted at Terry to follow him. They got into the car and gave chase. The 2 couples met face to face in a nearby parking lot. Terry started fighting with Sarah because she felt betrayed. Elizabeth was sitting in the car at the time and was afraid to get out. Cursing, screaming, and threatening, Michael approached Elizabeth and dragged her out through the window of the car. During the struggle, Elizabeth suffered a lacerated rib and her shirt got torn. Sarah and Elizabeth fled to a nearby gas station where they reported the assault to the police. The state charged Michael with first-degree burglary and domestic abuse assault. The court approved the no-contact order protecting Elizabeth. Terry packed her things and left, so Elizabeth and Sarah started living together. Michael continued to harass Sarah despite a ban. He would sit across the street, shouting insults or verbally abusing her. Additionally, Sarah received numerous incoming phone calls, but whenever she picked up, the caller would remain silent. She filed a report with the police, who worked with her phone company to set up a trap on her line to track the origin of these calls. Over a 3-week period, from June 26th to July 16th, Sarah's phone records revealed Michael made 162 calls to her apartment. On July 16, 2000, 1 month after her breakup with Michael, Sarah left for work at 10:30 p.m. At the time, Elizabeth was asleep on the couch. Their dog was safely locked in the bathroom to avoid disturbing Elizabeth when Sarah returned home at 4 a.m. However, upon arriving back, Sarah was surprised to find that Elizabeth had vanished. There were no signs of forced entry or a struggle, and Elizabeth's personal documents remained intact. The dog was still locked in the bathroom. Sarah decided to go to bed. When she awoke the next morning, Elizabeth was still missing. It became clear that Elizabeth had left without taking her purse, clothes, or other essential belongings, and she did not leave behind any note or explanation. Sarah reported Elizabeth's disappearance to the police 24 hours after first discovering she was gone. Elizabeth was 22 years old when she disappeared. The police launched an investigation, and of course Michael was their first suspect. On July 16th, the day Elizabeth disappeared, Michael started phoning the apartment around 3 p.m., logging more than a dozen calls through the evening. He last called at 10:56 p.m. That is, he stopped making calls 26 minutes after Sarah left for work and left Elizabeth alone. On July 17th, Michael was supposed to be at work. His friend Jared agreed to watch Michael's children. Jared testified he found Michael was pretty intoxicated when he arrived at his house around 5:30 a.m. Jared said Michael told him Elizabeth had stayed overnight and left around 5 a.m. Michael decided not to go to work that morning. Police called Michael the next day, July 18th, to ask if he had heard from Elizabeth. He said he had not. On July 20th, officers came to his house to let him know Elizabeth was missing. Michael said his taking a sick day from work on July 17th, the day after Elizabeth disappeared, was a coincidence. Michael also stated that due to their breakup, he hadn't been eating and had been getting cramps. Elizabeth seemed to disappear into thin air. She didn't contact her family or friends. Her bank account was untouched, and she had not even received her salary for the last month. The investigators knew that Elizabeth could not just leave without documents and money. All the friends she could have stayed with knew nothing about her whereabouts. The police interviewed residents and distributed flyers with an image and description of Elizabeth, but none of these actions gave the desired result. In early September 2000, Larry Headland, an agent with the Iowa Department of Criminal Investigation, interviewed Michael. During the interview, Michael claimed that he and Elizabeth had a harmonious relationship and denied any allegations of abuse between them. When asked about the attack on Elizabeth on June 16th, Michael admitted that it was an unusual action on his part. He explained that he had been drinking and that his emotions had taken over, leading to his inappropriate actions. Initially, Michael denied making the harassing phone calls to Sarah's apartment. However, when presented with evidence from the call records, he admitted responsibility. The agent then pointed out that the calls to Michael's apartment had stopped the night Elizabeth went missing. This caused Michael to become stressed. Michael explained that he just wanted to avoid arrest and did not want to be charged or held responsible for anything. That's why he lied about the phone calls. He objected when Larry suggested that Elizabeth was dead. After this interview, the police obtained a search warrant for Michael's home. In Michael's bedroom, the police found an unlocked safe. Inside or on top of the safe, an officer found a $2,000 gold pendant that Michael had given Elizabeth and a V-shaped diamond and emerald ring that she had received from her mother as a graduation gift. Elizabeth only removed the ring when she was showering or soaking in the tub. Otherwise, it was on her finger. In police photos taken after Michael attacked Elizabeth, the ring was still on her hand. Elizabeth had not been back to Michael's house since. So how did the ring end up in Michael's safe? When the police asked for an explanation, Michael said that Elizabeth must have left it behind when she moved out. However, officer pointed out that Elizabeth was still wearing the ring in a photo taken on June 16th, the day of the attack. Michael could not explain why the ring was in his bedroom. There are some suspicious points in Elizabeth's disappearance. Michael abruptly stopped contacting her on the day she disappeared, although the police only notified him 4 days later. This suggests that Michael may be hiding something. However, the police need concrete evidence to charge him. Time has passed so quickly that it is difficult to find clues. One possibility is that Elizabeth voluntarily went into hiding, but her family does not believe this. Although the case has been quiet for many years, her mother, Donna, has not lost hope that her daughter will return. Every year, she travels to Iowa, where Elizabeth used to live, to organize activities to raise awareness about her daughter's disappearance. In 2010, Donna rented a billboard with Elizabeth's picture and offered a $20,000 reward for any information about her daughter. Donna said she was concerned that something might have happened to her daughter, but she was hopeful that she would eventually be found. Someone definitely knows what happened to my daughter, and I hope that us coming out will jog their memory, she said. 10 years after her daughter's disappearance, Donna has developed her own theories about what happened. In an interview, she said, "I think the person called her and lured her out of the apartment to meet them. Then they argued and something bad happened that night." Despite the best efforts of the police and her family, Elizabeth's fate remains a mystery. Since her disappearance in 2000, investigators have searched 79 different locations but have not found Elizabeth's body. They entered her information into the National Crime Information Center's Missing Persons database. 17 years later, in 2017, the investigation was reopened. By this time, Michael Saperda had moved to Colorado. Police reviewed all the evidence and interviews. They discovered a key detail that had previously been overlooked. Jared, Michael's friend who was assigned to watch Michael's children on July 17, 2000, told police that when he arrived at Michael's house at 5:30 a.m., he found Michael quite drunk. According to Jared's testimony, Michael said that Elizabeth had stayed the night and left around 5 a.m. However, in previous interviews, Michael had never mentioned Elizabeth sleeping over at his house. More significantly, Elizabeth's jewelry was found in Michael's safe. Authorities decided to arrest Michael 17 years after Elizabeth went missing. Although her body was never found, investigators believe that Elizabeth was dead and that Michael was the culprit. In November 2017, Michael was arrested in Colorado and extradited to Iowa, where he was charged with first-degree murder in the death of his wife, Elizabeth. Donna said, "This is the best news we've had in 17 years. We've waited a long time and are so glad that he's finally been arrested." Michael later waived his right to a jury trial. The loss of key physical evidence, especially the victim's body, made it significantly more difficult for prosecutors to prove guilt. Without a body, forensic experts could not determine the cause of death, and the jury could not directly observe the victim's injuries or view crime scene photos. The defense argued that the prosecutor's goal was not to find the truth, but to convict Michael by looking for inconsistencies in witness testimony. Although the trial took place 18 years after the incident, the defense acknowledged during closing arguments that a body was not required to establish a homicide. However, Michael still challenged the state's evidence of Elizabeth's death. The district court concluded that the state had proven her death beyond a reasonable doubt. The court held that any theory that Elizabeth was still alive and could reappear at any time was unrealistic. The state presented evidence that Michael was the last person to speak to Elizabeth at 10:56 p.m. on July 16th, which he himself admitted. The district court noted Jared's testimony that Michael told Elizabeth to stay at his house that night. In addition, there were other suspicious circumstances. Michael unexpectedly left work on July 17th and did not call Elizabeth's apartment again, even though the police did not officially report her missing until July 20th. From this evidence, the state established that Michael's hatred of Elizabeth led to murder. Because Michael was controlling possessive of Elizabeth, it was highly likely that he intentionally caused her physical harm when she decided to leave him for someone else. The strained relationship between them was clear evidence of Michael's intentional intent to cause harm. The state presented evidence that Michael had repeatedly threatened to kill Elizabeth and dispose of her body so that no one would find it. From these repeated threats, the jury could conclude that Michael had intended to kill Elizabeth. The court reviewed the evidence and made a crucial decision. They discovered that Elizabeth had opened a new bank account just 9 days before her disappearance, but had not withdrawn her last paycheck. They concluded that she was dead. After carefully evaluating all the evidence, the court found that Michael was responsible for Elizabeth's death. On June 25, 2018, Michael Saperda, 58, was convicted of first-degree murder. On August 23, 2018, the court sentenced him to life in prison without parole and ordered him to pay $150,000 in restitution for Elizabeth's death. However, the story does not end there. In September 2020, the Iowa Court of Appeals changed Michael Saperda's conviction from first-degree murder to second-degree murder. Judge Mary Tabor, in a 30-page ruling, noted that while there was enough evidence to conclude that Elizabeth was dead and that Michael was responsible, the prosecutor failed to prove that Michael intended to kill Elizabeth. This led to the reduced charge. The case was particularly difficult because there was no body, weapon, or crime scene. Michael asked to be released or at least given a new trial. Ultimately, the court sentenced Michael Saperda to 50 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 30 years. Kathy Blair was born on May 31, 1961, in California. She grew up in a loving family with her parents, a brother, and a sister. From an early age, she had a deep passion for the arts, but music was what she loved the most. Singing was more than just a hobby. It was her true passion. So, when it was time to choose a career, Kathy didn't have to think twice. She knew exactly what she wanted. She enrolled at the University of Texas to study vocal performance and moved to Austin. After graduating, she became a music teacher and a Christian choir instructor. She absolutely loved her job, and her students adored her. They could see how much heart she put into music, and her passion was contagious. Over the years, Kathy was married twice, but both marriages ended in divorce. She had 2 children, a son and a daughter, whom she raised on her own. In 2013, when she was 52, Kathy moved into a new home in a quiet, safe suburb of Austin. She had been dreaming of a place that checked all her boxes, and she had finally found the perfect one. By then, her children were grown and living on their own, while Kathy continued her work in music and led the choir. In December 2014, her son Joe came to stay with her for a few weeks. He was 23 and serving in the military. Before his next deployment, he wanted to spend some time at home with his mom. On December 5th, Joe went out to meet some friends and didn't return home until almost noon the next day. As he walked into the house, he called out for his mom, but there was only silence. Feeling uneasy, he started checking the rooms one by one until he reached Kathy's bedroom. What he saw there was horrifying. She was lying on the floor next to her bed, surrounded by a pool of blood. Joe knew immediately she was gone. Panicked, he ran outside and called the police. When investigators got there, they quickly confirmed that Kathy had been dead for several hours, and from the sheer amount of blood at the scene, it was clear this wasn't an accident. This was murder. While the medical experts examined the body, police officers began processing the crime scene. One of the first things they noticed was that the drawers from a large jewelry box in her bedroom had been pulled out and were scattered on the floor. It looked like the killer had taken some of Kathy's jewelry, leading detectives to consider robbery as the primary motive. But something about that theory felt off. For one, the intruder hadn't taken anything else. Valuable items like Kathy's laptop, phone, and other expensive things were left untouched, right out in the open. The house wasn't ransacked, and there was no sign that the killer had searched for anything beyond the jewelry. Then there was the timing. Break-ins at night were pretty uncommon. Most burglars preferred to strike during the day when homeowners were at work. On top of that, this particular neighborhood was considered one of the safest in the city. Crimes like this just didn't happen there. Another strange detail was the sequence of events. It seemed like the killer had murdered Kathy first and only then started searching for valuables. Blood stains on the jewelry box drawers and other parts of the bedroom suggested that the attack happened before the so-called robbery began. That meant the intruder must have attacked Kathy the moment they stepped into her bedroom. Adding to the mystery, there were no signs of forced entry at the front door, although investigators found that the back door had been left unlocked. When they asked Joe about it, he explained that his mother often left that door open. With all this in mind, detectives started to wonder, was this really a robbery or just a cover-up? What if the killer had planned to murder Kathy all along? And if that was the case, it raised an even more chilling question. Could the person responsible have known her? And if so, did they also know about that unlocked back door? Despite their best efforts, forensic experts couldn't find any evidence that might lead them to the killer. There were no fingerprints, no DNA, nothing that could identify the person responsible. The only clue they managed to recover was a partial shoe print in Kathy's bedroom, left behind in her blood. The medical examiners determined that Kathy had died from multiple stab wounds and also showed signs of strangulation. However, there was no evidence of sexual assault, which only reinforced the detective's suspicion that this wasn't a random crime. It seemed personal. With no physical evidence to go on, police shifted their focus to Kathy's inner circle, looking for anyone who might have had a reason to harm her. Naturally, they started with her son, since he theoretically had the opportunity to commit the crime. But after checking his alibi, detectives quickly ruled him out. He had spent the entire night with friends, and his whereabouts were confirmed. Next, they spoke with Kathy's friends and co-workers, hoping to uncover any conflicts or grudges. But according to everyone they interviewed, she had no enemies. She was well-liked, never got into fights, and devoted most of her time to the choir. Just when it seemed like they had hit a dead end, detectives came across a lead. Several of Kathy's close friends mentioned that she had frequently talked about her second ex-husband, the man she had divorced 4 years before the murder. According to Kathy, their breakup had been anything but smooth. Her ex-husband wouldn't leave her alone and kept showing up, refusing to let go. At one point, she even told friends she was worried for her safety and asked them not to tell him where she had moved. Detectives tracked the man down and discovered he was living not far from Austin. When they went to speak with him, his reaction immediately raised red flags. The moment they mentioned Kathy's death, his first response was she shot? That struck them as odd. Why would he assume she had been shot, rather than stabbed or killed some other way? When asked about his whereabouts that night, he claimed he had been staying in his RV for a short getaway. He even let detectives search it without a warrant. But despite their suspicions, they found nothing. No weapons, no blood, no signs that he had anything to do with the crime. Without any concrete evidence, they couldn't pin anything on him. He remained on their radar, but with no real leads, detectives had no choice but to keep looking for other suspects. A few days later, detectives received an unexpected call from one of Kathy's friends, who had something strange to share. She and a few others had organized a memorial service in Kathy's honor, and during the ceremony, a man they didn't recognize stood up to give a speech. From the very first words out of his mouth, something felt off. His tone, his mannerisms, everything about him made the guests uneasy. But the strangest part was that no one there knew who he was. These were Kathy's closest friends, yet not a single one of them had ever seen this man before. And as he spoke, it became clear that he hadn't actually known Kathy either. His words didn't match reality, almost as if he was making things up on the spot. Curious, detectives asked around, and one of Kathy's friends finally recognized him. He had seen the man before. He worked as a sales clerk at a local women's clothing store. Police tracked this person down and questioned him. The man admitted he had never met Kathy. He said he had read about her murder in the news, felt sad, and decided to attend the memorial. His explanation was pretty weird, but there was no real evidence linking him to the crime. So, with nothing to hold him on, detectives had to move on, still searching for their killer. For several days, the case remained at a standstill until an unexpected twist changed everything. A man named Rob called the police, saying he had something they might want to see. According to his story, he had recently bought a new scope for his hunting rifle. This wasn't just any scope. It was equipped with a thermal imaging camera. Excited to test it out, he decided to take a walk in the early hours of December 6th, heading toward a wooded area near the edge of his neighborhood. As he walked, a car slowly drove past him before pulling over to the side of the road. A few seconds later, a man stepped out and headed down one of the nearby streets, disappearing into the night. At the time, Rob didn't think much of it, but later, when he saw the news about Kathy's murder, something clicked. The man he saw had been walking in the direction of her house. That's when he remembered his thermal camera had been recording the entire time. He went back and reviewed the footage, and there it was. The man, clearly visible, walking away from his car. Detectives were intrigued by the footage, but there was one major problem. It was recorded using thermal imaging, which meant it only captured the suspect's silhouette, so identifying him based on that alone would be nearly impossible. Still, the video provided some valuable clues. The man appeared to be tall, broad-shouldered, and had a distinct way of walking, and more importantly, the camera had also captured his car. Investigators hoped they could at least narrow down a list of possible vehicle models from the footage. They compared the man's height and build to their two main suspects, Kathy's ex-husband and the strange man from the memorial, but neither of them matched the silhouette in the recording. Their cars didn't match either. This only deepened detectives' doubts about both men's involvement, effectively bringing them back to square one. Over the next few days, they kept analyzing the footage, trying to extract any useful details, while also searching for new potential suspects. But despite their efforts, nothing substantial came from it. The case, once again, was at a frustrating standstill. Then, on December 15th, everything changed. That morning, police received a call from a caretaker who had gone to check on an elderly couple, Billy and Sydney Shelton. As she approached their house, she immediately noticed something was wrong. The front door was wide open, and there were clear signs of a forced entry near the lock. Stepping inside, she made her way to the bedroom, and what she saw was horrifying. The couple was lying in a pool of blood, their bodies motionless. Without hesitation, she called the police. Medical examiners later confirmed that both victims had suffered multiple stab wounds, just like Kathy. Meanwhile, detectives noticed a chilling detail. The drawers of their jewelry box had been pulled out and scattered around the room, with all the jewelry missing. But just like in Kathy's case, nothing else of value had been taken. Detectives couldn't ignore the striking similarities between this crime and Kathy's murder. From the very beginning, they considered the possibility that the same person was responsible. The victims lived just 15 minutes apart. Both attacks happened at night while the victims were sleeping, and in both cases, the killer emptied their jewelry boxes but took nothing else of value. From the beginning, investigators had believed Kathy's murder might have been personal, committed by someone she knew. But now they had to reconsider everything. What if this wasn't about revenge or a personal grudge? What if the killer was choosing victims at random based on some unknown pattern? Detectives looked for any connection between Kathy and the Sheltons' mutual friends, places they might have visited, anything that could link them. But there was nothing. Their lives had never crossed. That led to one chilling realization. They might be dealing with a serial killer. Now, this wasn't just about solving a murder. It was a race against time before he struck again. Police began re-interviewing everyone connected to the victims, hoping that someone would remember even the smallest detail that could lead them to the killer. They urged people to share anything, no matter how insignificant it might seem. And eventually, that approach paid off. One of Kathy's friends recalled a conversation they had a few months before her murder. Kathy had mentioned a disturbing encounter with a handyman who had been hired by her landlord to do some repairs on the house. She told her that the job had been done poorly, but more than that, something about the man's behavior had unsettled her. Detectives contacted the landlord, who was able to track down the worker's contact information. It was a local resident named Timothy Parlance. The first thing detectives discovered was that Timothy's brother worked at the church regularly attended by the Sheltons, and Timothy himself had also been seen there. Then they dug into his background and found something even more concerning. Timothy had a long rap sheet. He had been arrested multiple times for theft, and his targets were almost always jewelry. At the time of the investigation, Timothy was out on parole and living in a long-stay hotel. Detectives went to see him and he agreed to answer their questions. But when they asked to come up to his room, he refused. Instead, he insisted on speaking with them outside, in the hotel parking lot. At first, Timothy claimed he didn't remember Kathy, but when detectives provided more details, he suddenly recalled doing some repairs at her house. He insisted he had nothing to do with her murder and even said he had an alibi. He had been working the night shift at a convenience store when Kathy was killed. As they spoke, detectives couldn't help but notice that Timothy didn't seem to match the silhouette from the thermal camera footage. He was significantly shorter than the man in the video, and his car didn't resemble the one seen that night. So, with no solid evidence against him, they left empty-handed. But then, something unexpected happened. When they called Timothy's employer to verify his alibi, they learned that he had been fired a week before Kathy's murder. So there was no way he could have been working that night. Detectives immediately rushed back to the hotel, but Timothy was already gone. Instead, his wife answered the door and allowed them to search their room. That's when they finally caught a break. Inside, they found a pawn shop receipt showing that Timothy had sold several pieces of jewelry, and the date on the receipt was the same day Kathy was murdered. Detectives went straight to the pawn shop and quickly confirmed that the jewelry Timothy had sold belonged to Kathy. But that wasn't all. The shop's security cameras had captured footage of the parking lot, and what they saw there was even more interesting. Timothy hadn't arrived in his own car, which meant he had access to another vehicle. After running the plates, police discovered that the vehicle belonged to his sister, and that was a crucial detail because the car looked almost identical to the one caught on the thermal camera on the night of Kathy's murder. That was enough for detectives to secure a warrant to search the vehicle. As soon as forensic experts started examining the car, they found traces of blood on the front seat and the floor. When the lab results came back, they confirmed the worst. It was Kathy's blood. Right after that, police arrested Timothy and brought him in for questioning. But even when confronted with all the evidence, he refused to admit anything. Instead, he kept repeating the same phrase over and over. "These hands have never killed anyone." Detectives interrogated Timothy for hours, pressing him on the evidence against him, and eventually he cracked, but not in the way they expected. He continued to insist that he hadn't killed anyone, but now claimed to know who did. According to him, the real murderer was a man named Sean. Naturally, investigators were skeptical. The case against Timothy was quite strong, and the sudden shift in blame felt like a desperate attempt to escape justice. Still, they decided to check out Sean just in case. Nothing about what they found screamed murderer. Sean Gant Benicasser, 30, was a former science teacher with a degree in microbiology, and he had no criminal record. On top of that, he lived several hundred miles from Austin, making his involvement seem even less likely. Still, detectives needed to be 100% sure, so they traveled to his town to question him. Sean admitted that he had met Timothy a few months prior and found him to be a shady character. They hadn't spoken much since, but a few minutes later he said something quite weird. He had actually been in Austin on the nights of both murders. Even more interesting, he revealed that he had stayed at Timothy's place during that time. The situation only grew more confusing from there. At first, Sean claimed that on the night of Kathy's murder, Timothy had left the house without saying a word, but just minutes later, he suddenly changed his story. Now, he admitted that they had actually gone to Kathy's house together. According to him, Timothy got out of the car and returned a few minutes later, carrying a blood-stained bag. Later, when Sean peeked inside, he saw some jewelry. That's when he realized Timothy had done something terrible. But he insisted he had no idea what was going to happen and had never planned to be part of any crime. As detectives continued questioning him, Sean asked to use the restroom, and they let him step out. One of the investigators watched as he walked away, and that's when something clicked. His stride, his posture, his movement. It all looked eerily similar to the silhouette captured on the thermal camera the night Kathy was murdered. That raised a serious question. Detectives were no longer sure he was telling the truth. Now, they strongly suspected that Sean was the real killer. But without a confession, they had nothing solid to build a case against him. With Timothy, at least they had some physical evidence tying him to the crime. But with Sean, they had absolutely nothing. When he returned from the restroom, they kept pressing him, challenging his version of events. They told him they didn't believe he had stayed in the car and suggested that maybe Timothy had forced him into Kathy's house, threatening him in some way. It was a calculated move, and it worked. Sean hesitated, then finally admitted that he had entered the house alone. According to him, he had gone inside only to steal valuables while Timothy waited outside. He said he slipped in through the unlocked back door and started looking through the rooms for anything worth taking. When he reached Kathy's bedroom, he saw the jewelry box, and Kathy still asleep in bed. Sean initially stuck to his story. He claimed he had carefully taken the valuables and left without harming Kathy. He even suggested that Timothy might have returned to the house after the robbery and committed the murder for reasons unknown to him, but detectives weren't buying it. They knew that blood had been found on the jewelry box, meaning the killer had only taken the valuables after the murder, which contradicted Sean's version completely. They kept pressing him, breaking down his lies piece by piece, and finally he cracked. Sean admitted that he had killed Kathy. According to him, as soon as he entered her bedroom, she woke up and lunged at him. Panicking, he pulled out a knife and stabbed her multiple times. Once she was dead, he grabbed the jewelry, rushed out of the house, and got back into the car. Detectives still had doubts about Sean's story. They found it hard to believe that Kathy had suddenly jumped at him and tried to grab his knife. But regardless of the details, his confession was enough to arrest him. To strengthen their case, they took his shoes and had forensic experts compare the soles to the bloody footprint found in Kathy's bedroom. It was a perfect match. However, there was still one major problem: the murder of the elderly couple. When detectives questioned Sean about it, his entire demeanor changed. He immediately asked for a lawyer and refused to say another word. With no evidence directly linking him to that crime, investigators were at a dead end. So they turned back to Timothy. He was arrested as an accomplice in Kathy's murder, and under Texas law, that meant he faced the same charges as Sean, even if he hadn't physically participated in the killing. Whether he liked it or not, he was going down with him. Timothy admitted that he had driven Sean to Kathy's house, but insisted that he had never stepped out of the car and had no idea his partner was going to kill her. However, he did confess to selling Kathy's stolen jewelry, which directly tied him to the crime. When detectives pressed him about the murder of the elderly couple, he admitted that he and Sean had gone there to rob the house as well. But just like before, he claimed that he had stayed in the car while Sean went inside. Investigators considered the possibility that Timothy was telling the truth. The thermal camera footage from Kathy's murder had clearly shown only one person exiting the vehicle. If the same pattern had been followed in the second crime, it was likely that Sean had acted alone once again. In the end, Timothy was charged in all 3 murders due to his role in the crimes, even though he hadn't committed the killings himself. As for Sean, he was officially charged with Kathy's murder, but detectives still weren't able to prove his involvement in the second case. At least not yet. The court ruled that Timothy and Sean would be tried separately. During his trial, Timothy maintained that he had no involvement in the murders and had no idea his partner was going to kill anyone. But that didn't change the fact that he had driven Sean to both crime scenes and profited from selling Kathy's stolen jewelry. In the end, the jury found him guilty and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Sean's trial, however, was much more complicated. Unlike Timothy, who was directly linked to Kathy's case by physical evidence, the case against Sean rested mostly on his confession, a shoe print in Kathy's bedroom, and the thermal camera footage. His lawyer immediately went on the attack, claiming that detectives had coerced Sean into confessing and pressured him into taking the blame for someone else's crime. He also insisted that the rest of the evidence was purely circumstantial. As a result, the jury couldn't reach a unanimous verdict, forcing the judge to declare a mistrial. But prosecutors weren't giving up, and a few months later, he was back in court for a second trial. This time, the prosecution managed to convince the jury of Sean's guilt, and he was sentenced to life in prison without parole for Kathy's murder. However, despite strong suspicions, he was never officially charged in the killing of the elderly couple. Investigators were certain he had committed those murders as well, but without solid evidence, they couldn't make the charges stick. In the end, while both men faced justice, there were still unanswered questions in the case. Detectives were never able to determine why Sean had killed his victims. If Kathy had really woken up while he was in the bedroom, he could have simply run away. It was pitch dark, and she wouldn't have been able to identify him. The only thing they could reasonably conclude was why Timothy had chosen Kathy as a target for the robbery. It seemed likely that he had held a grudge against her ever since she complained to her landlord about his poor quality repairs months earlier. That complaint had affected his paycheck. He may have resented her for it. Whether that resentment played a role in what ultimately happened that night, no one could say for sure. But one thing was clear. What started as a simple burglary had ended in cold-blooded murder. As for the elderly couple, detectives had no solid theories about the motive behind their murders. They considered the possibility that Timothy had interacted with them at church and that some kind of conflict had led to his resentment, just like with Kathy. But that was purely speculation. When it came to Sean, investigators couldn't rule out the possibility that he had no motive at all, that he simply wanted to kill. If that were the case, then there was every reason to believe that he would have continued murdering if he hadn't been caught. One final crucial detail about Sean's second trial was how much weight the prosecution placed on the thermal camera footage. That single piece of evidence ended up being the deciding factor in securing his conviction. If that neighbor hadn't decided to test out his new thermal scope in the middle of the night, if he hadn't happened to record the exact moment Sean left his car, the case against him might have fallen apart completely. Sean could have walked free.